So what I wanted to do, so since Robert's not here, the core of my talk was going to be, with Robert, was first to talk about his book, but then what I'm going to do is really jump to what was the second half of the conversation with him, which is 2017 was a seismic year in digital media and in media. It fundamentally changed the connection between advertisers and publishers. There are 4 earthquakes that I wanted to discuss with Robert that I'm going to focus on today. First is that P&G withdrew $100 million in ad spend earlier this year in around April. P&G is considered the canary in the coal mine for the advertising industry, and so I'll go a little bit into that. The second one is Amazon advertising emerged with a 40% plus growth rate, and initial estimates were $1 billion in annual revenues. It ended up being around $3 billion and growing. Third, which people are probably a bit more familiar with recently, is the merger of Disney and 21st Century Fox. I'll talk about that in a second. And then the final one is Facebook's recent announcement that it's no longer highlighting publisher content in its feed and focusing on interpersonal relationships. And then the other thing which actually came up while researching the talk with Robert, is what I would describe as an emerging fault line, and I'll come back to that in a second, but it's actually a pretty important one. Very quickly, Steffi just give you background on what I'm up to. This is really what my primary background is, 12 plus years in digital media. I got started in MTV Networks with actually Jason Hirschhorn's group, and then over the years have consulted for Viacom, and also more recently a spin out of Pearson. The animation didn't do what it was supposed to do. And so, given that Robert isn't here, very quickly, I'll just tell a quick funny story, because it's not the first time that I've actually been put in a situation where I've had to improvise at the last second, or unusually, if an audience came to listen to Robert Kinzel, but I ended up having to carry a bit more of the load, which is when I was working at MTV Networks, I was also writing about digital media and foreign policy, because I had a background in foreign policy and I had a unique perspective on what was happening in digital media at MTV, particularly at MTV Networks. And so through that, I was actually invited to speak down in Tampa to the Special Ops Command for the Department of Defense. And in speaking to them, I was speaking to a room full of people trained to kill me. And so it was a little nerve-wracking, but a friend of mine who was at Google at the time, we both went down, we presented, and afterwards I called my colleague at MTV who had helped me pull together the presentation, and who himself at MTV had gone through some rough politics around the MySpace acquisition that didn't come through, and I said to him, look, I've now presented to a room full of MTV executives and a room full of people trained to kill me, and in only one of those instances was I afraid for my life. So given that, very quickly, my newsletter, I send this weekly. It is, again, I curate articles. This is from each step of the video supply chain. This is the year-end newsletter where I pulled out my lessons and also delivered my predictions for 2018. The key point of my newsletter is to make executives feel uncomfortable, that on a weekly basis, they need to read something and rethink the fundamentals of what they're doing. I have a pretty extraordinary list. I'm very proud of what I've delivered. These are all, every brand that you see here has somebody who is either C-suite or in the senior management role, who open my newsletter and engage with it and read it weekly. My open rates and click-through rates are 60% greater than MailChimp's standard. This is after 100 sends, by the way. Both are 60% greater than MailChimp's benchmark for marketing and advertising newsletters. And so obviously, here's the pitch, sign up at PARQOR.com. So what my outline for my conversation with Robert Kinzel was going to be was really twofold, which is one, to talk about, the first half was going to be talking about his book, and then the second half was going to ask him about these seismic shifts in the media marketplace in 2017. The first half is really about the book, and very quickly, he was here to pitch his book. I'll make the quick case for the book, which is if you really want to understand the moving pieces of the media marketplace in terms of the business model, what YouTube is pushing against in terms of the traditional business model, and the pain points that it's creating for traditional publishers. I think this is actually an important read. It's a very easy read, which is important, but it's also an important read. I think this is something I'm going to come back to. This is a core theme of what I'm going to talk about, which is the difference between having traffic versus having an audience. And it provides content. The book also actually is a good read in terms of providing context for recent disappointments at YouTube, particularly original channels. What I like to do in my newsletter is highlight quotes from an article and then talk about the business implications. There's a handful of quotes from the book that I just wanted to highlight. I think this is an important quote, and I'm happy to put the deck online, but I think this, when people buy the book, I think this is actually a very key ingredient to understanding where media is headed, particularly as it's driven by YouTube and the duopoly, which is YouTube doesn't generate just a click to watch a video. It generates a whole engagement between the audience and the content creator. And it generates additional revenue channels. It is fundamentally about engagement. The internet is an engagement medium. YouTube understands engagement around video content. Not only that, but advertising is not the only business model that's going to work for these content creators on YouTube and going forward. And then last, and this is the fundamental tension which I wanted to talk about, and obviously was originally going to explore with Robert, but it's worth a talk on its own, which is you have infinite digital business models. You don't have media moguls who exercise monopolistic control over distribution channels. There are so many different possible business models that can be built around online video. But not only that, but that the democratization of the tools means that anybody can create content, and because anybody can create content, that makes a market much more competitive, highly competitive, and difficult to succeed. And so given that, let's come back to the earthquakes. So again, P&G, Amazon, the Disney merger, Disney-Fox merger, and Facebook, and the publisher feed. This was one of my favorite quotes that came out after Facebook changed its model. Facebook changed its model with publishers. And I want to read this out loud. I mean, it's up on the wall, but I think this is something that people just need to think about, and particularly people here, which is publishers think that they have audiences. They have a brand. They assume audiences come to their website, click on their content, and therefore they have an audience. But I think most publishers, particularly traditional publishers, have traffic. They have people that come to their website, bounce in, bounce out. That's the bounce rate metric. But I don't think they know how to engage their users like the way that in that earlier quote about how YouTube content creators engage their audiences. And I think that's the fault line, is that there's a wonderful Digiday podcast interview with CNN's Meredith Hartley, and she makes a really interesting point. She says, look, page views are a business. It's an awful business, but we have to do it. There's no other choice. But then she made a point about analytics, which is, and the analytics industry requires scale. What implicitly she's saying is, as CNN, as a publisher, we need to have scale to justify our business. Now, what that also implicitly means is we don't necessarily need to have engagement, we just need to have scale. And for that reason, nobody's thinking about the metrics that all these YouTube content creators are thinking about and building their businesses around. And as Robert Kinsel points out in his book, getting more views than most publishers get on their video content. And so I put together this really simple chart, and I'm going to come back to it as I talk about each earthquake, but it's basically, when you think, it's the simplest way to think about the business model for a publisher, which is you have a CPM model. You're charging for every 1,000 viewers. Either you're a brand that's such a strong enough brand that you're able to charge a pretty high CPM, or you're buying programmatic, and that's based off of traffic. I think this is it's a bit of a simplification, but I think it's the easiest way to think about the moving pieces in the media marketplace, particularly after these earthquakes. And so you'll see in each earthquake, I'll highlight what's particularly relevant. And I think what really reflects the key point about the difference in the models is this wonderful quote from Les Moonves, which is, digital is sexy, digital is cool, digital is important. But if you want to go sell a car, you better go watch NCIS, which is watched by 20 million other people. So P&G pulls $100 million in spend. That's the first earthquake. I picked this image because where did the money go? So this is my favorite quote. It's a quote by Scott Galloway, who's actually speaking tomorrow when he was interviewed in the FT about the spend. I think this is a monster quote. I think that if you look at every problem facing publishers going forward and you read this quote and think about the moving pieces in this, I think it's the right question, which is if the internet is an engagement medium, it doesn't matter how good your ads are, because ultimately people are either choosing to get in their car and go to a supermarket, or they're going to go to Amazon and buy a good. So what ultimately does an ad accomplish? Does it accomplish retail velocity? P&G wasn't sure, and in fact, P&G were so disappointed that they said, too much of our advertising is uninteresting, uninspiring, and therefore ineffective. They also had brand equity concerns, which was that they found the supply chain of ad inventory online to be murky and non-transparent, and even fraudulent. And so I think think about those two quotes. The impact of P&G pulling $100 million is, they're basically saying, look, we don't want, coming back to that traffic versus audience quote, they don't want traffic. They don't want to be around traffic. Traffic is the easiest thing that publishers can bring. What they want are an all-human audience who will engage with their ads and who they can convert to some measurable metric, because traffic isn't delivering that. And for them, that was enough for them to pull $100 million in digital ad spend, and again, P&G is the canary in the coal mine. The other two tremors from major media brands is Taco Bell, $10 billion business per year, growing to $15 billion by 2022. They've decided to bring all their creative video in-house. They produce their own videos. And then Pernod Ricard has also decided to bring most of its media buying in-house. Their rationale is, we want to be able to connect the dots between our ads and the consumers, and we found that media buyers are actually interrupting that data, our ability to connect the dots for that data. Second earthquake is Amazon emerging as a $3 billion business, 3 times as much as people anticipated in 2017. I really like this. This is a quote from an article about Amazon, but Amazon's pitch is, hey, you want to connect the dots from an ad to a sale? We have 300 million users, and we know what they buy, we know where they live, and they know what they browse. So if you're going to run an ad, buy from us, because when that ad is run, we can actually help you connect the dots, much like Pernod Ricard wanted to do, better than you're currently doing with ads based off of traffic. This is a slide from their pitch deck. And again, it's billions of customers' shopping experiences. That is a really powerful premise when you're focusing on the difference between traffic and audience. Again, $3 billion relative to the $61 billion that Google made last year, but they're growing at 42% growth rate. And so I think what the key takeaway from advertising is, I think they created quite a negative impact on the revenue based off of traffic, and are going to push the market towards these two models that are increasingly based off of engagement. Again, you'll notice that a targeted all-human audience is something that they're focusing on, because they can identify their users on their back end. Third, the Disney and 21st Century Fox merger. I think this is important because they redefine scale. If you're a publisher right now in the marketplace, your scale isn't good enough. Because now 21st Century Fox and Disney have been able to combine a whole host of assets. So whereas before the merger, a company like Viacom was considered in the same ballpark as both Fox and Disney, now they look small. And so the question becomes, these are still enormous traditional publishers, but what does that mean? Where can they take that? And I think that, I don't know what the impact is on the advertising industry from this is, simply because it's TBD. And I think but the one thing to consider here is this deal was made more for OTT and SVOD purposes, subscription video on demand, than it was for being able to negotiate with advertisers at higher scale. The last one is Facebook pushing publishers out of the newsfeed. That's the last earthquake. I really love this quote. It was basically anonymous quotes from CES from the floor. And it was somebody saying, I don't know how you can continue to hope that Facebook will figure things out with publishers. It's not in their self-interest to do that. And so I think that what they're basically saying is, we don't need Facebook we don't know what Facebook delivers for us, but we don't know where they fit in their ecosystem. And now Facebook's saying you don't belong in our ecosystem. That means there's one less source of traffic for these publishers. And that means, again, that they're going to have, that scale and traffic is not a business model, and engagement is the new business model they're going to focus on. And so here, I think it's just an important point. Again, targeted all human audiences, which is what Facebook offers, or buying all human audiences at scale. Again, I don't know what this impact of Facebook is ultimately going to have, but it seems to be that they're moving publishers away from all scale models, and they're pushing them and CPMs more towards targeted, and publishers more towards targeted sales. So based off of the 4 earthquakes, thinking about the road ahead. So the key takeaways are P&G is forcing the market to rethink. Amazon is delivering better data. Disney and 21st Century Fox is a bullish bet on SVOD and OTT, and I think it's skeptical about digital advertising model. And then last, Facebook may have single-handedly killed definitions of scale for many publishers. So if I were a betting man or woman, I think this is where it's going to play out, everything highlighted in green. I think that publishers are going to increasingly have to focus on their value proposition to advertisers is going to be, we have humans who meet your target audience parameters. We don't necessarily offer traffic, we don't necessarily offer scale, and so we're going to charge higher CPMs for that reason. I think that's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen easily, but that's what I think it's going to play out. Fault line is real, and PARQOR has a solution. So coming back to what I do with my business partner, another way to look at the fault line is, again, this goes back to the interview with the CNN editor, which is, yes, page views are a necessary evil, but I don't think publishers, if they're being forced to focus more on what audiences engage with, that means they need to understand how and why audiences engage with their content. They need to have a content taxonomy that their creatives use when they create all of their original content. And that means focusing on what the target audience wants to engage with, where, and when. It also means not focusing on the data that the market largely provides through traditional data providers. All of these are standards. All of these, again, are the page view standard. They're going to be here. They're not going anywhere for a while because, again, scale is the model that all their businesses are predicated on. But I realized something while researching the talk for Robert, which was when I thought about all these traditional publishers that I've mentioned, their budgets for these analytics companies are in the millions. It is $60,000, $100,000 to get new data, to make a decision around the new content that they want to create and the audiences that they want to pitch to advertisers. So the next question becomes, well, what is that number for a YouTube content creator who's competing with these publishers? How much are they paying for their data that's getting more views than these traditional publishers? 0. They get it for free. They create content for YouTube. They do some sort of rev share, but they are not paying an additional marginal cost every time that they create new content. So why work with us? Again, we're the only vendor with a proprietary tool, patented tool around creative data. Again, the how and the why of content decisions. We're able to map our data to creative and marketing decisions across platforms. None of these traditional providers do that. And again, as you think about the business models moving towards more of an engagement-based model, I think that is an increasingly important distinction, and we have the right solution at the right time. Why hire us? We have a blue-chip media pedigree. My partner for the past 14 years has done these studies for ABC, including around Lost and Desperate Housewives, early in those shows' lifespans, ESPN around ESPN Radio, NBC Golf, TBS and TNT. They made the decision to buy Major Payne, a $200 million decision based off of that research. And then we actually more recently did a study for a multiple Ellie winning New York-based publisher. An example of our data really quickly, in our last study we tested 38 content subjects, 25 content styles, 26 content formats. What we're doing is quantifying all of these so that you can establish parameters for your creative and marketing teams. So using Snapchat, the thing that we learned the thing that we learned, just for time's sake, I didn't include it, but 30% of respondents said that they use Snapchat as a platform, social media platform on a regular basis. But when asked, who do you trust or rely on when discovering new brands, products, or services? 4% said that they trust Snapchat. So if you're thinking about where Snapchat's advertising play is going, the answer is it's not going anywhere good. But given that, what that also says is doesn't mean that Snapchat isn't a content play. And so if you're thinking about Snapchat as a content play, the most fascinating thing here is that food and cooking, recipe-driven, was the top content subject. Comedy, music, and beauty also showed up. That wasn't surprising. But food, cooking, recipe-driven was number one. Secondly, it was what we're able to quantify is why people watch the content. So ultimately, when they're consuming the content, what's their motivation? And then based off, once you understand their motivation, this is the way that my business partner, Bob, uses his data. He focuses on, all right, I understand why they use it, so what should be the tone that I address? So again, just going back one sec, if it's to amuse myself or to be entertained, then what he knows is that funny, original, smart tone is something that's going to work, and we're actually able to break that down by demographic. And then last, the content formats are final element to consider. So based off of all of these, if you want to do a humorous cooking show with recipes on Snapchat, that is actually an unusually good bet. I would call that a fat tail bet. Our real value proposition is the ability to distinguish between long tail, fat tail, and mid tail content. And so, in sum, if you're nervous about earthquakes and fault lines, contact me. My contact info is here. And thank you. How much time do we have left?
Thank you, Andrew, for this great business presentation. Any questions to Andrew?
Yes.
Yeah, Andrew, so there's a number of blockchain startups, like you guys doing Anto.
This is Rod Beckstrom. Who is Rod? What are you doing, Rod?
Well, I'm a former CEO like Can, currently invest in startups.
Okay. The starfish and the spider. Okay. Yeah,
So, how are these new utility coins in the ad space? What do you think about that?
My problem with blockchain is, it's funny, I'll tell you a quick funny story about blockchain, which is I had a meeting with a startup via somebody I'd met through the DLD Yossi community, and Jeff Pulver ended up showing up, and what it was supposed to be an hour meeting turned into a 3-hour meeting where Jeff kind of walked us through the blockchain marketplace. I think the two ways I think about blockchain right now, because I spent a bunch of time reading about it, but the fundamental question becomes, okay, what's the fundamental utility? Who's the customer? From what I understand about the media marketplace, I don't know who a customer is, right? I mean, everybody I've worked with are trained to think in very specific ways, particularly when it comes to digital advertising, that either the customer doesn't exist yet, or the customer is one of those kind of somebody who's sitting in a garage somewhere, in a closet somewhere with a bunch of servers and trying to figure out how this stuff applies to advertising. But I do think that the other element of it is that there's the accountability of blockchain that isn't found elsewhere. I think if you think, I'm going to totally improvise this answer, but I think if you come back to just that dichotomy, that framework I had between traffic versus audience, I think blockchain is a model for traffic businesses. I don't know what the marginal I don't know what the additional marginal value is to an engagement-based, an audience-based business, unless there's something that Amazon or Google isn't doing to verify the users that they're serving. I think that would be my framework in thinking about it.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Steffi, thank you.
One more, the last. Okay.
Yes.
How do you characterize the power dynamic between the platforms, Facebook, Google, and either publishers on one side and brands on the other? It used to be kind of a reinforcing triangle, and now how do you see that dynamic going forward, especially in light of how you look at data and who owns the data about it?
So I'll start here. This is from my own experiences working in digital media, which is the thing that I found most frustrating when I was in media, and then the most fascinating when I'm out of not working in corporate media, is the media buying industry, particularly around television, still requires the scale model to the point where they are perfectly happy to impact a digital deal, so that you'll see publishers underselling the inventory on their website. I've seen this firsthand. And so when people talk about the dynamic in the marketplace, you say, all right, well, the old model is scale, and there's a whole industry. There are people's salaries, both on the publisher side and on the advertiser side, which are based off of scale, what they're able to sell, what they're able to buy. That doesn't change overnight. That's not going to change overnight. you're starting to see a bit more of the seismic shifts, I think, with Pernod moving a bunch of stuff in-house. So that's the thing that I saw firsthand. Then you have something like programmatic, which totally disintermediates the publishers, where it's basically inventory anywhere, and somebody's selling that. So now you don't really have that you don't have that relationship between one side's contract, the seller's contract requires them to sell scale, and the buyer's contract requires them to buy scale. It's totally disintermediated. It's a different contract. And then when you think about the social media platforms, earlier on, again, coming back to that audience versus traffic dynamic, what they're saying is, okay, if you're not going to do a direct sale and you're going to do programmatic, your question is, well, are those people human? And what the platforms are able to say is, we have humans. So if you want to buy advertising that's served to human beings, buy with us, because otherwise you're buying traffic. So buy audience from us, they're human beings, engage with them, and in fact, if you want to target that, buy from us. So I think that value proposition there is where the platforms fit into it. So just to summarize, I think the traditional publishing is stuck in the buying scale, selling scale, but that's nobody's fault other than the fact that that's what people's incentives are to participate in the marketplace. I think the programmatic is just a bizarre set of rules that are very difficult to process. And then when I think about the social platforms, I do think, again, it really can be summarized in the difference between traffic and audience.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.